This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
They say you can tell a lot about a person by the contents of their freezer. So, what does a bottle of Jägermeister say? It says you have standards, you don't cut corners, and you like your Jägermeister shots the way they're meant to be enjoyed, ice cold. As for the frozen taquitos and mystery leftovers, we'll keep that between us. Drink it cold, or don't drink it at all. Jägermeister. Damn, that's cold. Drink responsibly. Jägermeister liqueur, 35% alcohol by volume. Imported by Mast Jägermeister, U.S. White Plains, New York.
You have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wayne. Welcome to Away the Podcast, and today we have something a little special because it's a pretty exclusive group of players who know what it's like to finish 7th in the Premier League while being a player at Sunderland AFC. And not only that, but then have to prepare to go again with the expectation that comes with that the following year. And the result of this season has seen that number increase by quite a few, to be fair. But today we get a chance to talk to someone who was a huge part of Peter Reid's side, who repeated that feat of finishing 7th in the table around 25 years ago. He made 197 appearances for Sunderland between the sticks and also made over a century of appearances for his country during a fantastic career. But today we're very pleased to welcome Thomas Sorensen. Hello, Thomas.
Yeah, great to be on. I'm obviously joining from a fair bit away, but it's good. My heart never left Sunderland, so, and I hope to be back soon as well. So, it's a joy to talk about those times.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, the conversation that we had to have beforehand, I'm trying to get out the habit of saying Tommy because I did it from the stands all those times. But it is amazing. You said my heart's still in Sunderland, Thomas, and it's amazing. We've spoke to so many players who've said something similar. I mean, and you've got this team at the moment where you can feel them feeling the club and sensing what it's about. Does it have that something that when you're in it and it really pulls you in, you're in it and you're feeling what the fans are feeling?
Yeah, I think it's, it hit you quite early on. I came over from Denmark, obviously. The whole English game was brand new to me, but, the sense of togetherness up at Sunderland, you quite quickly made aware of the history, and you can see the passion. You can see, we obviously try to put everything down on the pitch, but so do the fans, and the length they go to, what they sacrifice to be at the stadium, to go to away games. I think, it also gives you a, responsibility as a player. It's not every club that has that. And I've been at different clubs. And so it's not something you can take for granted all the time. But, I think those things, the special atmosphere that was there, us doing well, having that first season while I was there, we got promoted, obviously on the back of that dramatic playoff final that sadly wasn't won, but that was my advantage to some extent, because otherwise I don't think I would ever have ended up at Sunderland. So, looking back, those 5 years that I had, the players, the rapport with the fans, how we settle as a family up there, I think, it definitely still stands after, after still obviously moving on and going onto other things, it still stands as something really, really, really special.
Yeah, well, we're gonna cover that in a little bit of detail. But you're speaking to us from Australia now, of course, and I can tell, but the listeners can't, but I can tell because it's nighttime in the background for you, and the sun's shining for me. But how's things out there? I mean, is World Cup fever taking hold?
Yeah, it is. I've got a few things that I'm doing during the World Cup, and the excitement. Obviously, Australia is participating, so that's a big bonus. And football, despite not being the number one sport, there's it's the biggest participation sport in Australia. So there's heaps of interest, and especially around the big tournaments. The Matildas, the the women's team, and the Socceroos, which are the men's team. Whenever they play, everyone gets together, and there's big watch parties and everything. So it doesn't quite translate into the local league, but there's huge potential, and the World Cup is the biggest thing.
Yeah, it is really interesting, Thomas, because I'm listening to you, and you're just like my mate who moved out there about 15 years ago. There's a slight Aussie twang in there at the end of every sentence. But anyway, we'll circle back to the World Cup before we finish up, because we, of course, want to get into your thoughts about this current Sunderland side as well. But I want to talk to you about your fantastic career. And actually, when I was looking into it, because I want to start off with you growing up in Denmark and the time that you did, because I was looking, and you would have been around 10 when Denmark first qualified for a World Cup in 1986.
Yeah.
And then you were a teenager when Denmark won the Euros in 1992 in Sweden. So I imagine that was an incredible time to grow up in Denmark as a young
Yeah.
football fan.
Yeah, I think it definitely put Denmark on the map, and I think for all us young kids, it gave us some fantastic role models. You know, those memories, those teams, those players. I think, yeah, and it inspired a whole generation, and I was obviously one of them. Had that, you know, crazy time when we went and didn't even qualify and ended up winning. And from my perspective, I think, being a goalkeeper, there was always someone to look up to. And
Mm.
when I got into my teens, there was obviously Peter Schmeichel. He played a big part in my career, and also, helped me. Before I moved to Sunderland, I was at a few trials at Manchester United. So through him, I got some great experiences. And it also sort of gradually pushed me towards the national team, as we as I moved to Sunderland, my name was already on the radar and everything else. So yeah, growing up in Denmark, obviously football, and for a goalkeeper, that position was taken really seriously. I think, if I go back to when I was 7, 8 years old, we had qualified training, and I had that all the way up. I had some great mentors. So it stood me in good stead when I finally was sort of thrown into the deep end of at Sunderland, because it was a massive change. I'd played in a few games in the top league in Denmark, and I played before I moved to Sunderland. I was in the first division, or what would be the championship, and then a few under 21 national team games and everything else. But to play in front of 48,000 was a big change, and the pressure and the expectation and everything. But luckily, I had some good teammates. I had a good coach, a couple of good coaches, and everything else that definitely helped me in those first couple of months.
Yeah. Well, just going back to that final of Euro 92, if anybody of us who is maybe a bit younger wants to know why the back pass rule was brought in, they need to go
Yeah.
back and watch that final, because that's pretty much the straw that brought the camels back. But yeah, anyway, just talking about you, it's interesting there that you said that in Denmark they took the position of goalkeeper being seriously, because in the UK quite often, and still today actually, I think, seeing my son now, I went through it, and seeing my son playing for teams, you see actually that it's like, right, who's going to go in goal? Who's the kid who's going to go in goal? For you, was it always the plan to be a keeper, or did you start off as that striker wanting to bang in 20 goals and ended up playing in goal?
Well, the disillusioned striker that found out he wasn't good enough. Nah. No, to be fair, I got in goal early when I was, I think probably about 7 or 8 years old.
Mm.
On a cold day, I hurt myself, and they had a bit of, they put an arm around me and say, "Yeah, you go in goal, and you can sort of," and I did quite well. Apparently, I did quite well. So they were like, "Oh, maybe we should keep him in goal." And it didn't. I stayed in goal until sort of, I think, maybe 13, 14, and we moved. My mum and dad moved a couple of hours away, and I got into a club where we were quite dominant, and I had nothing to do. So I actually started playing a bit outfield, and I think I went for there, striker, midfield, defender. I think I was all over the park for a year and a half or something, and then ultimately I knew my calling was goalkeeper. I knew that was where I was best, and I think that the position, the mindset around it, everything else, I think suited me down to a T. So, I always knew when the competition got better, that I would always go back in goalkeeping, and then, it opened up opportunities to get to regional teams and everything else, and that sort of brought me closer to selections, like up the pathway. So yeah, it was never in doubt that I was going to be a goalkeeper, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was looking as well, and I was reading that it was pretty quick after you made your debut. I think your debut in the Danish league was in 1996. But you hadn't really established yourself at OB from what I've been reading.
No.
But people had already made that Peter Schmeichel comparison. Was it a strange thing that your reputation was kind of getting bigger and bigger, yet you were still going out on loan?
Yeah, no, as I said, I was obviously on the radar. I was in the youth national setup, and I think you're sort of in the media, so they're always looking for the next big thing, and there's always so I probably wasn't the only next Michael that was around, but I was I was one of them. And there, I was stuck behind a really experienced goalkeeper, who was a legend in the Danish league. I think he still holds the most amount of games played there, and I knew it was going to be tough. He was a club legend. So I had to sort of seek, as part of my contract, that they had to loan me out. So I went to my first loan was at a Premier League club. And I got to play a few games, but then we struggled, and the coach, so I played with Thomas Graversen and a few others at the time, and he put all of us on the bench when we sort of when we struggled to get points, and then eventually I had to sort of move. So I moved to a first division club, and I think that was actually where. Yeah, it was when, that season where Tony Coden was there for a few times and scouted me along with other clubs. So I had offers, and, so it was exciting. As I said, I was in the under 21 national team, and, that's where, you'll have the eyes on you, especially with Peter Schmeichel, so there's a natural look at Danish goalkeepers. I think, I probably, along with a fair few others, benefited from him sort of paving the way. So, I think that was just the way it went. So I had to move away from Odense, and actually, at the end of that season, we had an agreement that he was going to finish his career at the club, and I was going to take over. But that's where the offers came in, and obviously Sunderland and the rest is history. So I think he played for another year and a half after I left.
Yeah. Well, you said Tony Courton had been out to see you, and I remember he because he played for Manchester United before Sunderland, so I think he had links in both camps, and obviously both clubs were after you. I think Ajax were linked as well. But was it the fact that Sunderland moved first, or did they make you feel more wanted, or what was it? Because I look at the list of names, and Sunderland are in the second tier at this point. So it seems that for you that's quite a sensible decision.
I think I actually probably have to thank my parents because, I was in this, process. I was speaking to Ajax, as you said. I had been to Manchester United for 2 trials. I was speaking to Udinese, who was in the Serie A, and then I heard this opportunity with Sunderland, and again, like you said, it wasn't the Premier League, so it wasn't sort of first of mind. But my mom and dad said, go and have a look at it. Why, you can always say no. It'd be stupid to just wave it away. And so I went over there, had to visit, and knew straight away that that's what I wanted to do. So thank God I went. So I got there, I met Peter Reid. I saw what Sunderland was about. I watched. I think it was the home game against Sheffield United in the semi-final. So I watched that. Just got a sense of the place, the fans, the atmosphere. And I met actually while I was in Peter Reid's office, Michael Gray came through, and he had just missed that penalty. So he, but just to see the interaction and and the way Peter Reid was and everything else. I think it's I definitely went home, quite certain that was what I wanted to do, and also because realistically, it's probably my best chance to play. Going if I'd gone to any of the other clubs, I might have had to wait 1 or 2 years, at best to get into the team. And another funny story was that I ended up signing obviously for Sunderland, and all that was in place. And I was sitting at home, and the phone rang, and it was actually Alex Ferguson, uh, who wanted to offer me an opportunity at Man United. And I had to obviously tell him that I'd signed for Sunderland, and I was all happy with that. And to be fair, he was great about it. He said it's probably the best, for my development and everything else. Is probably a great decision. And he said, yeah, good luck, and that was it. So and looking back at it, I've never ever regretted it, because I think it was a perfect step for my career. Had I gone straight into the Premier League, it probably would have been a step too far, or definitely it would have been a lot tougher. I think walking into getting used to, the English game, the physicality, the atmosphere, the pressure, and everything else. To go into that environment in a well drilled, well gelled team with there was a great culture around the club. Great culture bearers in the team like Quinny and Bawley. I think that was vital. I think for me, who knows how it would have gone otherwise, but I definitely feel that it definitely helped me massively in that first season.
Yeah. Well, actually, you have already said that you came in after that playoff defeat, and Mickey Gray's already introduced himself to you. But how did you find the mood when you joined? Because that was, I mean, I was at Wembley that day. Everyone was absolutely devastated for a good while. But as you said, those big characters like your Kevin Balls, your Alex Rays, your Niall Quinns, I could probably go through the whole team. But
Yeah.
that must have been an education in itself to join that dressing room, especially at that time.
Yeah, the bigger education was I didn't have a clue what was going on. In Denmark, in Denmark, you're brought up. We learn English from, I think it's 3rd grade or 4th grade, I think, and so I was pretty chuffed with my language skills, and then I jumped in that dressing room where there was Irish, Scottish.
Mackem.
I ended up. I think just laughing when they were laughing in the first month or two. So that was probably the steepest learning curve, was just trying to get on top of the language, the slang and everything else. But yeah, it's here I don't remember it as being difficult. I think I never sensed that. If there was any negativity, I never sensed that. I felt it was a team that, yes, there was disappointment, but I also felt it was a team that knew that they had something going. that there was enough quality to replicate and do better. Obviously I was one of the changes. There was a few other changes. So you know, I think there was a belief that that probably it was an even better team that the year before. So yeah, I never sensed there was people were down or anything. It's definitely not something that stood out to me. There was always great camaraderie. It's a very unique. Like when I look back at my career, that first two couple of years where it was mainly English players. I think I was probably the only, because Perez and Soderbergh I think had left, so there was I was more or less the only one. So that unique togetherness, I don't think I ever experienced that. Maybe in the Danish national team a bit, but just that everyone, whenever we did something, everyone was together. Everyone was on the same page, and it was still a time where we could go to the pub on a Tuesday night, and the mobile phone had not sort of made its way into the dressing room. So it was I remember as like a hugely, like very very special time, and obviously when you're winning, it makes it even more fun.
Yeah. I know. I do remember you being literally head and shoulders above everyone else in a nightclub in Sunderland one night. I do remember that.
To be fair, you're lucky, because I don't think I've been in a nightclub many times in Sunderland. Maybe like 2 or 3 times, maybe. But yeah.
But I was going to say about trying to, difficulties understanding, the Scottish maybe from Alex Ray and the Mackem coming out of Mickey Gray. But you had Peter Reid and Bobby Saxton as a coaching team. I mean, to come in from Denmark and have, I don't think, talking about a unique management team, again, that's another education right there, isn't it?
For sure. I think, they couldn't have been any different from Danish coaches, because, and it's, but, their passion, I think, yeah, you get around their swearing, they know a lot about football. That was probably the thing I had to get used to. But after a while, you don't hear the swear words. You just take in the information, and I loved that they were so direct. That's probably a thing that was a bit different from Denmark, where yeah, it was a little bit more complicated, and it wasn't always. Here, if you played badly, you knew it. If you played well, you got a pat on the back. And there was also a great emphasis on the squad, and the camaraderie. There was room for that. And then they were just a good combination, where Bobby Saxton was obviously putting a lot of the sessions together, being a sort of tactical mind, but then Peter Reid, just obviously with all his knowledge, but also a great motivator. I think he was very good at getting the absolute best out of players, and there was a great respect around both of them, for sure. And it was a funny story. Actually, it was a few years later. I think it was actually after I'd moved to Aston Villa, and I think Peter Reid went to Leeds. I think he was. And I spoke to him because we were playing and we were staying in the same hotel, and we just sat and talked about the good old times, and he actually said that he had taken me on solely on Tony Coton's. He had no clue who I was, and he said, to be honest, he said, you know what, I would have given you 3 or 4 games, and if you hadn't played, if you hadn't made, I would have found someone else. And I was like, thank God I put my gloves on for those 4 games. That was good. So what, that's the directness, and you got to love him for it. And sadly I live in Australia, but the times I've met him since then, he's still his good old self, and which is great to see.
Yeah, well, it does explain a few players who did actually go through that. So it does explain that, who played a few games and disappeared. But talking about a first season in English football, you've come across, didn't lose a league game until the 19th game, November 21st against Barnsley. You conceded 28 goals in 46 league games. The team got 105 points, won the title. For you, it must have just been a joy watching this team in front of you.
Yeah, it was. It made it a lot easier when you had, especially the the attacking third. We had obviously Nicky Summerby, Alan Johnston, and then Niall Quinn and Kevin Phillips. I think, teams just purely struggle to keep them down, the service and everything else. And then, you obviously have the steals through the middle, Kevin Ball, Alex Ray, and, Paul Butler, Jody Craddock, Mickey Gray. There was so much quality and passion and so everyone was dialed in and working for each other. There was no loose ends anywhere. And, for me personally, obviously it couldn't have gone any better. There was, I think I had 29 clean sheets for that season. And as you said, obviously there was some games where I was a deciding factor, but overall, it was it's just a joy to be part of, and the atmosphere, around Sunderland was special. Every game sold out. Just still gives me goosebumps to think about it, and looking back at the parades that we did, and I don't know, they were estimating a couple, like 100, 200,000 that was on the streets. So that, I think it summed it all up. It was every generation. It wasn't just kids, and it was old people and everyone. So it also puts it into perspective how much it means and everything else. So so that was special.
Yeah, well, one thing that was slightly missing, I suppose, and we'll go through all of the Peter Reid years, but that was missing was success in a cup competition. And that season,
we did go to the semi-final. We lost to Leicester in the League Cup.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, because was that one that got away, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we were. Did we win the first game? I can't remember. Or did we draw the first game? And then we went to. I'm sure we went to Leicester, and I think we lost maybe 2-1 or something. And we it's a long time ago, but I definitely remember us being in the game. Casey Keller was in goal for them. Tony Cotty, I think he scored.
It was
just one of
them.
Yeah, and my old nemesis from later on, Martin O'Neill, was the coach, so I would have loved to have won that game. But it was just probably one of them that would have cemented an absolute perfect season if we had gone to a League Cup final at Wembley, and I thought we were good enough, and we took Leicester all the way, and maybe they just had that little bit of magic right at the end, where I think we, as I remember, we had them on the ropes in that second game. I remember Casey Keller made a couple of good saves. So sometimes in those games, again, I got to play in an FA Cup final with Stoke, and we had one chance at the right time in that game against Man City, and we didn't score. And sometimes, that's football. You got to take those few chances you get at the right time, because that changes everything. So one that got away for sure.
Yeah, I was gutted, because I genuinely think that season, on our day, on your day with the team, that could have beaten absolutely anybody. But just before we get into the Premier League season the next year, I think it's time for us to take a quick break. So we'll be back very soon.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You know those friends who support your preference for podcasts over music on road trips? That's the energy State Farm brings to insurance. With over 19,000 local agents, they help you find the coverage that fits your needs, so you can spend less time worrying about insurance and more time enjoying the ride. Download the State Farm app or go online at statefarm.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Expedia and Visit Scotland. invite you to come experience the beauty that awaits in Scotland. The sweep of wild coastlines, quiet lochs, and untamed landscapes. Fresh cuisine that feels rooted in the land. Come experience the kind of stillness that stays with you long after you leave. Plan your Scottish escape today at expedia.com/visit Scotland.
Do you hear that? Sounds like breakfast is ready. Because Quaker's coming in hot with morning nutrition. 100% whole grain oats and a good source of fiber to fuel the rhythm of your morning and kickstart your day. And that sounds absolutely delicious. Fuel to start whatever's next. Quaker, official sponsor of FIFA World Cup 26.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast. And we're just about to get into that first Premier League season, Thomas. And I was going to go that summer. Was a real strange one because you're now a Premier League player. You're clearly excited about jumping up to the Premier League. This is why you joined the club, I suppose. And then Alan Johnson leaves, Lee Clark leaves, Michael Bridges leaves. Andy Melville was a kind of in the starting 11. I think he played almost every game that season. They all leave. We do bring in people like, of course, Stefan Schwarz, who was a huge signing. Steve Bould, of course.
Don Hutchison, did he come at that time?
That was the next season. That was the second season of the Premier League. Because I think Peter Reid was looking at real experience with Steve Bull. There was Thomas Helmer, who made the headlines as well when he signed, but didn't quite go to plan. But was it strange that you were preparing for the Premier League and all these players who you played with, and you made 56 appearances, by the way, in that promotion side. That was a huge season, and then all these players are leaving, and you're preparing for the Premier League.
Yeah, I think definitely because, and I've spoken to Michael Bridges, that he lived in Australia for a while, and we talked about it. And I think we went to Denmark actually on pre-season, and he was told to stay to stay away, and he wasn't coming along. So it's always tough when you got such a tight knit. And everyone has played their role, but that's also the game. I can see it from Peter Reid's point of view. He's looking at potentially for the Premier League to bring in more experience, to bring in. You've got to be honest that these are household names. Who's played at World Cups, who's played at big clubs and everything else. Maybe past their prime, but you're hoping that you can squeeze maybe 1 or 2 years out of them to get a foothold in the Premier League, because that's, I think, ultimately is the name of the game. So I think from a squad perspective, it was a bit sad and a bit strange to start with, but yeah, I remember those players that came in as good guys. So it's not like you got some bad eggs in there, and we still had a very good season.
Yeah. Well, actually, you saying we went to Denmark. We played your former club, and you were on the bench. You didn't play. What was all that about?
I don't know. I don't know. I think Peter Reid, for some reason, thought that was funny. I know I got a fair bit of stick from the Danish media and all sorts of like, no. and yeah. So I actually can't remember the details, what it was. But yeah, that was a strange one. But I certainly remember the first Premier League game. I think that was an eye opener against Chelsea. I think that's I think it looking back at it, it stood us in really good stead, because I remember going into that game. I think we were extremely confident. I think we were sort of in that mode. We're going to show the world. We're going to make a splash. We're going to we're going to make a mark. And yeah, Chelsea at that time had signed all these players and was spending a fair bit of money. So going to Stamford Bridge was like the perfect setup for us to come in and just, show us our arrival in the Premier League. But I also remember sitting in the dressing room at halftime and I think I was looking around, and I think everyone looked shell-shocked. I think we were all, okay, this is a step up. And maybe we were a bit too confident. Maybe we forgot that hard work and everything else still counts, and discipline and tactical and everything else. So I think that game, it was an eye opener, I think, and but I also think it set us up. I think it put us back down on the ground. Made us focus on what we were good at and everything else, and then I think we played Watford not far off after that, and then we got a win, and then we went on from there.
Yeah. I just remember your reaction when the Zola did that scoop and Poyet did that volley. You were just kind of, well, what can you do about that? Standing there.
It was just, as I remember, it was just one of those afternoons. I think, we were just, we're probably just a rabbit in the headlights a little bit. And didn't expect, okay, maybe it is not the championship. It is a step up in quality. And there's actually some world-class players in that Chelsea side that, that made it a sour afternoon for sure.
Wasn't much fun, but later that month, it was of course your first, I want to say Weirtime derby, but it was at St James's. It was a big one for Newcastle because Hull dropped Alan Shearer for this one. The rain was absolutely pouring down. I mean, when did you kind of click onto this rivalry? Was it because obviously people were talking about getting promotion the season before? Was it when we went up, or was it as soon as you joined?
No, I think you're always aware of it. But it's mentioned even when we were in the championship. That was always on the radar. It was always, sort of in the periphery. It wasn't obviously, the main attention. But for a lot of people, that was also a big goal of getting to the Premiership, was getting that matchup. And, obviously, as soon as we got promoted, the schedule came out. Yeah, you knew when we were playing Newcastle for sure. And that was also, it's a great thing. I've always relished, derbies because it's something special. It's special for the fans, it's special for the city, but it's also special for the players. You can sense the energy. Yes, there's always this, every game is the same, but they're not. Like big games are bigger than your normal games. And just to know that you're sort of, you're carrying the hopes of everyone in Sunderland. I think, it sharpens the mind. And I think just riding into Newcastle on the coach, you don't have to say anything. Peter Reid didn't have to say anything in the dressing room. Everyone knew, that we were there to fight with our lives, more or less. And the weather wasn't great. I think one of the things that I remember clearly from that game was Kevin Ball tackling. I can't remember. It would have been not far from full time. He tackled the ball with someone, and he was in a puddle of water, and he hit it over my head back towards goal, and it hit the crossbar. And I just remember, I was like, this can't be true. No, this is not real. But luckily, we had a bit of luck, and I think he was quite happy that it didn't go in. So I think it ended up being a good night.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And it did lead into a few months later. It got even better in the November for you because you got your first cap for Denmark. I think it was against Israel. It was only, so I said you made your debut in 1996. You joined Sunderland just after your 22nd birthday. I mean, at this point, did it dawn on you, that it was such a short space of time from going to making your debut to then suddenly now playing in the Premier League and playing for your country? Because that's a huge step in that space of time.
Yeah. I don't think I sort of thought it was too quick. I thought I was ready for it. I think sometimes, I know I've been around a lot of players and advised players as well. And I think, the path you take and the decisions you make, I think if you make the right ones, it stands you in good. Obviously, you always have to perform, but I think actually, coming to Sunderland, not going to Ajax and all those things, that made me, the playing in the Championship and then the Premier League. I think I knew I was ready for the national team. That wasn't really a doubt,
Mm.
and it was a great honor. And Peter Schmeichel was still there, so I wasn't first choice, first couple of years. And I could also learn from him. And, so I got used to, gradually got used to it. And, so I was ready when I then finally took over in 2001, I think, after the Euros and, leading into that 2002 World Cup. So, yeah, it was not something that I sort of struggle with or anything. But yeah, you can look at it and say, yeah, it's 2 or 3 years and everything happens in those years. But yeah, I think it was, yeah, it sort of just was a natural progression up the ladder, I think.
Yeah. Well, just a quick mention in February that season as well, because it was the first ever derby against Newcastle at the Stadium of Light, and I remember that atmosphere because I can't remember whether I was more excited or nervous, or just had the fear that we were going to get beat in this first game. But in the end, they go 2-up, and Kevin Phillips rescues the day by scoring twice to get us a draw. But just with games like that, when the atmosphere is that tense, when you can feel it from the crowd, is it sometimes? Does it always help you, or does it sometimes hinder you? I mean, how does the fans need to be for you to feed off them to actually be a positive thing?
I think in any circumstance, I think you want the energy from the fans, and also when things are not going quite that well, and obviously in that game, as you said, we went down. So, so it's something that, it gives you hope still, it gives you, and also it keeps you, it keeps you switched on because, if you can hear the fans, if you can hear their passion, I think, I think it spreads to the field. So, all the fans sitting out there, like every boo and every cheer, like they all matter in each direction. So, I think that's what made those, derbies, so special, that the energy and the fans never stopped believing. And that's why we didn't. And yeah, luckily we had a guy who won the European Golden Boot that stepped up to the plate and got a few goals, which was great.
Yeah, it's just for fun. Sometimes it's not pleasant when you can't sleep for a week and all that energy comes out for the actual game. But anyway,
Yeah.
in that season, we're third in the Premier League on Boxing Day, and then we get beat by Everton 5-0. Then we win only 5 in 20 league games and finish 7th. But I wanted to ask, well, what was the reaction of the players and Peter Reid at the end of the season? Because if you just say we go up and finish 7th, that's an incredible achievement. But it seems to be that the conversation ends up about this season is that we were doing so well and dropped off. So what was the reaction at the end of the season?
I think obviously you're never happy. It's in some respect, it's better to to finish on an upward momentum than finish on a downward. But I think there was still, there was a lot of lessons learned. I think, the realization that it's a long season. It's at the absolute top level, and you can't. The margins are so small at the Premier League level. We see it to this day. It's not easy, and yeah, I think definitely people were aware that that we didn't keep the level. There was a happiness with the 7th. I think if you look overall, as you said, you're very, very, very happy with it. Probably overperformed in that first 6 months or 4 or 5 months. But yeah, it's I don't exactly remember what was said and what what the conclusion of that season really was. But yeah, I definitely remember the lessons learned, and and I think as well there was a fair few other new players coming in the following season as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just remember being confused at the end of that season because it was absolutely brilliant season, but I was thinking maybe what could have been, and I didn't want to feel like that. But just because in the context of what's just happened to Sunderland finishing 7th, how do you go about dealing with the expectation of the next season? Because I suppose naturally as footballers and as competitive sportsmen, you always want to do better than the season before. But obviously in the Premier League, that's a difficult thing. So how do you deal with that?
No, I think there's two ways. There's got to be a realistic perspective, and then you got to have dreams and ambitions. But it's also going to be it's going to be a different season next year. There'll be European football, obviously, which is going to be great, but that's going to take some of the focus away. Can you replicate the same form? That's always that's one of the things I found is, where, like, we're going back to where we finished that first season. It never replicates. It's not like, okay, it's going to replicate for next year, because there'll be some new players, there'll be some players leaving like we had, and it takes a lot of hard work to keep that going. Other teams are more aware of systems, ways of playing, and I've also sadly seen complacency from individuals, from other things. So there's a lot of things to be focused on, but on the other hand, that's just something you should be aware of, and still, you should try to push, and at every level to become better. And I'm sure Debris and everyone around the club, are looking at improving the side. Looking at new players. Where can we strengthen? What can we do? I can't see why not. You cannot finish seventh. I think it's still incredibly hard to finish in that top six. That's something that's a long term. I think that's something long term when you can, you can proper build. But you can again compare to the biggest rivals, Newcastle. When the Saudis took over and they were going to win the Premier League, and they're finding it hard. Even with probably a bigger budget, everything else. So I think sometimes you just gotta enjoy every season as it happens, and you can't take anything for granted. You can hope for the best, but there's a lot of hard work to back that up, and I'm obviously hopeful, but there's no guarantee. But it's going to be great to see European football. I can't wait for that.
Oh yeah, tell us about it. Yeah, and we've already said kind of, I don't know whether it's going to be which unlucky city is going to get Sunderland in the first away game, but it's going to be full of red and white. But just going into November in the following season, we go back to St James's, and I think a lot of people have probably been waiting for us to get onto this, because this time it's Bobby Robson in charge, and we come back from behind to lead 2-1, and then Niall Quinn makes a typical strikers challenge in our box, and the ref points to the spot with around 10 minutes to go. I mean, clearly not, but even when it's in the moment, you're probably not thinking that people are wanting to talk to you about it 25 years later, are you?
For sure not. I think, again, going back to the David, there's so much focus. Like you're shutting everything out. You just focused on doing the best you can for the team. So as soon as that penalty and the sort of initial disappointment, there wasn't a secret that Alan Shearer was going to take it. I had a good idea of, his patterns. He generally hit it to the keeper's sort of top right. Penalties has always, going back to my time at Odense and the experienced keeper that I talked about. He was very good at it, and he passed a few things, some strategies on, so I was sort of, I had an idea what I was going to do, and it ended up sort of trying to double bluff him a little bit, that he knew I was, what, and my hope was that I could try to, give him some indication, and then, sort of double bluff him, and that he maybe under the pressure with the importance of the game, that he might be changing his strategy, just maybe sort of overthink the situation. And it worked out. It obviously is something that that became something that I didn't expect it to become because, yes, I think you can see from the pictures that as soon as I save it, you're obviously excited and everyone runs towards you, but I'm already, thinking about the corner and what's next. And it's not until, hours after the game and you suddenly get confronted and people start mentioning it. And, I've told this story that we went to a pub down, on what was it the lakefront? Not the lakefront, the coast where we stayed in Sunderland, and after we left the pub, somebody sort of came over and said that somebody had offered £500 for the stool or chair that I sat in. So I think gradually you sort of start to say, oh, whoa, this means a lot to a lot of people, more than I maybe thought it would, and. It's obviously nice to this day that people mention it because, yes, you play for yourself and you play for your career and you play for your family, but it's so damn nice to know that you had also made a difference to the fans that backed us every week and traveled near and far to support us. So if I could, just do a little bit in that direction, it's obviously a massive thing.
Yeah. And we'll have to tell young kids who are listening, this was before the days that goalkeepers wrote everything on their water bottles. It was all in.
Yeah,
it was all in your head.
Honestly, the only thing you could get was from Match of the Day if you watched that. That was there wasn't any research. I think at the end of my career, and it's probably even better today. But yeah, you could go back and you could watch players' penalties from when they were nearly 10 years old and everything else. It was a lot different back then. So I think it was a lot more natural. It was a natural contest of sort of cat and mouse, and obviously trying to influence the player and knowing a little bit, what certain players were generally doing. But yeah, it's game has definitely changed in this day and age.
Talking about making a change to difference to people's lives, I always remember walking back because I was at the Stadium of Light watching that game because they had the big screen, which shows how long ago it was at the Stadium of Light, and it was chucking it down. We were walking home, and there was an elderly woman who was in her garden just getting soaking wet on her own in her garden in a house on the way back when everyone was walking past. She was just cheering and everyone was giving her a hug, and she had the biggest smile on her face. And I just one thing I'll never remember that. But the question I did want to ask you about this was, did Quinny buy you a few drinks after saving that penalty?
I think I owed him a few favors from when I got to the club and how he how he put his arm around me. So you know what, I was just happy to pay him back. But yeah, and I still don't know what he did and what he was doing, and because he's for all the technique and finesse he has, that was a bit of a clumsy challenge. So yeah, but that's what a team is for. That's what a team is for. So you know what, I was quite happy, but also it's also amazing for me to hear your story, because that's that's what makes it special. That's still what sort of gets my hairs on my arms raising, and because football is football, but football is also so much else, so much more. And that time I had at Sunderland, as I said earlier, was special, and those derbies were obviously everything on steroids in some way, but I think it encapsulated the whole experience for me. I think, and again, it obviously helped that also, that Alan Shearer for us as players, for all the Sunderland fans, he was sort of the number one nemesis. So I think that the whole story of it was perfect in that way.
Yeah. Well, that second season, similar to the previous season, was second in late January after drawing against Bradford, and then we win.
We didn't learn anything.
No, you're talking about lessons learned. That must have been a good session, because we win 3 of the last 14 games and finish 7th. Again, another massive achievement, but again, slight feeling of what could have been. Yeah. The other thing is, Thomas, looking at this season as well, those two Sunderland sides in those two seasons finishing seventh finished on more points than this Sunderland side this season, but didn't qualify for Europe. I mean, how much of a disappointment was it not qualifying for Europe?
Yeah, but that's obviously, there wasn't anything called the Conference League and, all those things, so I don't know how many English sides actually made it to the Champions League at that time, but, so it's European football has expanded, and thank God for that. I think it's great to see so many countries and leagues, that can actually, do well at a high level. So, I'm only happy. It's a different time, and I think it's great that a team like Sunderland gets that opportunity for the fans. And I experienced it with Stoke City when we lost the FA Cup final. We were in the Europa League the year after, and made it to the, I think, quarterfinals. But yeah, just what it meant to the fans, and get to travel, and get to see other countries, and all those things. They're special. To be able to, if you're a Sunderland fan, to take your kids to Prague or Lisbon or whoever they draw. Let's hope they draw some nice places. So that is, and there's a special atmosphere on those away trips. I remember, when I was a Stoker, we would play Besiktas, we played Valencia, and they made a party out of it, and it was incredible. So I'm sure it'll be the same as you said. Sunderland fans will take over whatever city is on the schedule, and they'll have the best time of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just having a quick look there that Chelsea qualified in that first season in the UEFA Cup, finishing fifth. And then, interestingly, Villa qualified for the Intertoto Cup in sixth. I remember, I think one of those years, Sunderland turned down an invite to the Intertoto Cup. I don't know if were any of the players involved in those conversations? I doubt there were.
I don't know. I don't remember. I played in the Intertoto Cup. It was actually my first and one of the only games I played for Odense. Was sort of in the summer. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe late at that time, there was actually some European places up for stake. If you actually went far enough, I think. But I think Peter Reid. So that would have been, what was that, 2000?
Yeah, 2001, I think.
Yeah, so that's where the World Cup, and I think everything else was on the back of that. So it's. I think you're trying to protect your squad, and if there's not much value in it, I think. I remember definitely the last couple of years of the Intertoto Cup or whatever it was called. There wasn't much focus on it, and I don't think the fans would have been too excited as well.
No, and I remember how much Peter Reid liked a pre-season tour as well. But just going just to try and sum up those 3 seasons, because if you, I haven't got the numbers, but I imagine if you look at how many games we actually lost in those 3 seasons as a 3-season run, it's not many. I mean, those teams must have been incredible to play. And like I said, at Christmas, both seasons, we were in the top 3. We got 105 points in that first season. I mean, to come into English football and have that as your first 3 seasons, I mean, that must have been incredible.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's, obviously the first year, the expectations was to get promoted, but the 2 next years, we performed well above any expectation, because it was really survival as the first protocol. So yeah, I couldn't have wished for anything better. It's probably the best 3 years if I at any club. Looking at how we performed, what the atmosphere was like, and everything else. So that was a very, very special time. I think that was peak. Peak Sunderland, and also a peak in my career for sure.
Yeah, we did tail off, finishing 17th the season after that, and then the season after that, early on that, Peter Reid did leave. I mean, did you feel it? Feeling different around the training ground? Did you sense a change? Did you sense things were getting stale, or did it just happen without anybody really realizing it was happening?
Yeah, I think. I experienced something similar when I was at Stoke, actually. It's that transition from, you got that core group that knows the club, that knows what it means to play in red and white. And as we've progressed through those 2 years, obviously there's the second season we finished second. I remember, the club sold Don Hutchinson. He had been one of our best players.
Yeah.
And we just didn't, just didn't find a like-for-like substitute. I know they paid a fair bit for Torre Andre Flo. There was other players. And you can just start to see, the snowball effect running in the wrong direction. Kevin Ball wasn't playing anymore. Like all of the players, Kevin Phillips, Niall Quinn, they were all sort of, getting older. And yeah, it just made it, just difficult to replicate. And it doesn't take much, as I said earlier. It's such a marginal game. If you just start to, drop off 5%, you go from finish 7th to finish 17th. That's just how it is. And the confidence goes, the doubt. And then, Peter Reid getting sacked and Howard Wilkinson coming in, and that was a bit of an experiment. And then obviously Mick McCarthy coming in at the end, where we were obviously sealed to go down, and his mission then became to set the team up for the championship and look to get promoted back up. So it was a bit of a sad ending. I must say those 2 years, it wasn't fun, especially the way it ended. And, it wasn't, I just remember that last bit. I had a meeting, we all had a meeting with Mick McCarthy about the following season. And it's probably one of the hardest things I had to do, to actually tell him that, that my ambition was to play in the Premier League, because I felt in some way that, I left the club at a critical time, and, to some extent you let the club down. And that's how much I felt for Sunderland. But then, I was still young in my career, and that ultimately, alongside Sunderland, I think me and Kevin Phillips and a few others, there was a wage thing and they had to recoup some money. So I think there was, I was also sort of half me leaving, half me being shoved out the door in some way. But yeah, it was a sad parting for sure.
Just to quickly go back to Peter Reid leaving, because you actually got injured in his last game at Arsenal. I think you came off after about 15, 20 minutes when we got beat 3-1 at Arsenal, which was actually no disgrace against that Arsenal side, to be fair. But when Peter Reid left, he was the one who signed you, brought you across as a 22-year-old. And he had that team, and he was, you probably looked up to him when he first signed and had this persona about him. And for him to go must have been a huge thing for all of the players that he brought in.
Yeah, it's always, there's a very few instances where you actually, it's actually great that a manager leaves. Generally, it's never a great thing, because there's always, great respect. You're used to the rhythm and the whole schedule and everything and what goes on. And yeah, there's a genuine bond. I think, as you said, he brought me in. He had a great bond with a lot of players. But also realistically, that time was also slipping away, or he hadn't, along with everyone else at the club, hadn't been able to replicate it, or at least, have a progression or a continuity from when, players started to leave. And so it's sad. It's, you never want a manager to, especially not someone who's done so well for the club. But yeah, sadly, it's also part of the game.
Yeah, I didn't want those Peter Reid years to end, but they had to end at some point. No. But you mentioned the just very quickly the Howard Wilkinson experiment, as you put it. Was because if we were to pick any manager to be the most opposite to Peter Reid, it was probably Howard Wilkinson. I mean, was it just too different?
Yeah, I think it was, and some of the methods. He was obviously, I think, for the time, he was very cutting edge. He was all into his psychological experiments, and he brought in a psychologist as well that was doing some sessions. But yeah, I just think that the team and the players were not ready for it. It was just such a change that he didn't capture, because that's what you're hoping when you get a new manager. Every time you're hoping that he can back to basics, instill some belief, and start to grind out results. And I just think he never got that going. I remember talking to him a few times, and actually not really realizing what he wanted. He was talking in all these metaphors, and I just think he didn't capture the dressing room, and sadly so, because it was at a crucial time where it was probably our last chance to get back in and turn the season around, and it just never happened. And then obviously Mick McCarthy again.
Yeah, well, I've lived in Yorkshire for 20 years and I still don't understand some of them, I have to be honest. But yeah, but just on, again, you talked about leaving Sunderland. You joined Sunderland, as we said, you just turned 22. You left when you were 27 years old. I imagine actually, those formative years almost in your 20s, you left Sunderland probably a completely different person to the one who joined.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's both on and off the pitch. It's but my wife, she moved with me, to Sunderland. I think we grew up very quickly. Just settling into being away from home, not being in the same country as your parents, having to work everything out. Even though there was good support from the club, you still have to work everything. You still got to find a daily routine and all those things. And then as a football player, that's I was thrown in at the deep end and learned quickly, and grew massively. It opened the opportunity for national team and all those things. So as I said earlier, that 4 or 5 years, 5 years that I had at Sunderland, that I can thank the rest of my career for that.
Yeah, well, just in terms of coming back, because that was the summer of 2003. I don't know if you've got many memories of this, because just over 2 years later, the first time you come back, November 2005, you come back to the Stadium of Light team with a Villa team that's got Gavin McCann and Kevin Phillips in it. Predictably, Kevin Phillips scores and Villa win 3-1, which I think Sunderland got beat every week that season. But that must have been a real strange experience, especially because there was three of you in that team.
Yeah, it was weird how because I obviously signed first, and then boom, boom, it sort of came, uh, but yeah, no, it was great with familiarity. They were both good players, but yeah, now the things I remember, and the thing you always worry about is, what's the reception going to be, and I've always pride myself, at the clubs I've been at, I've always taken my time for the fans, and always gone down and applauded the away fans, and whenever win or lose and all those things. But I also know in some way, I also, like I said before, I also felt bad about leaving. And, so to get a good reception, I think it put the Sunderland fans forever on the top shelf. I think they're best fans, in the world. I think for me, definitely personally, and I must say, wherever I've gone back, years later as well, it's always been a great welcome. And I'm hoping that this December, I'll be at a game. I'm waiting for the schedules to come out, because we'll be back in Europe for the lead up into Christmas, and I can't wait. And I'll take my whole family over. My kids have only heard about Sunderland; they've never been there. They experienced obviously my time at Villa and Stoke. So I would love for them to come up there and see what it was all about, where it all started. Now I'm getting quite emotional. So I'm hoping this December everything sort of falls in place, and Sunderland has a home game, and I'll be there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say actually, because just to sum up your time at Sunderland, because even I remember Port Vale this year in a couple of games, your chant has been started out in the stands. 25 years later, I want to talk to you. I suppose anybody who does something like this from a Sunderland point of view would love to this chance that I've got today. I mean, that must feel a lot that, a quarter of a century later, people want to hear about what you've got to say, your time at the club, and they still chant your name on the terraces at games, even though the success we've had with this team this season.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about. And yeah, it popped up. There's people in Australia, and there's Sunderland fans all over the world, which is great. And there's a few in Australia, and I don't know how I can put it into words. It's something, just something that means a lot to me and my family as well. And when I think it was last year, I got inducted into the Sunderland Hall of Fame. I think that's incredible. That little me from Denmark with some ambitions to to be a goalkeeper. That I have made an impression and made great memories for people, not just myself, but for a lot of other people. I think that doesn't get any better than that.
I should never chop onions while I'm doing podcasts like this. But anyway, let's get your take on this Sunderland side very quickly, and especially the goalkeeping department, because as we said, you've been through it yourself. Anthony Patterson was a huge part in getting Sunderland promoted, but I think to some people's surprise, Robin Roofs was brought in, and it surprised a few people we went after a goalkeeper, especially after he'd had one breakout season in the Netherlands. There's, again, you with Peter Schmeichel, there's been a lot of comparisons with you, which is high praise, of course. But what have you made of him in his first season in the Premier League?
No, I think he's been a great signing. I've been very impressed. I think, he was probably brought in as competition. And what I love about it is that, the goalkeeping position, I think the value of it has risen tremendously. You obviously look at some of the great goalkeepers, Neuer and whoever's come after him. It's highlighted how important it is, and also I think he was also signed from the play out from the back perspective. I think that's where he's also incredibly good. And Patterson, is maybe lacking a little bit. So I don't think was it £9 million? I don't think it's not like you're paying the bank. It's not like you're selling everything you've got. So looking at it now, it's probably the best investment they've done this season. I think to me, I think he's been the best young goalkeeper. He's definitely in the top 6 or 7. I think, and that's big praise when you play for a side that's not expected to be up there. You play sort of maybe you got David Raya, who's had the best season, but he's not far behind. You look at his stats. I think it's 10 clean sheets. So couldn't have gone any better. And I think the investment, now that he's gone to the World Cup, as an investment as well, Sunderland can always keep him for a couple of years. He's still young, and they can sell him. And it's been a good bit of business. But hopefully he stays for a few more years. That would be fantastic, because now there's European football. The Sunderland's on the up, and I know better than anyone else it's the best place to be when times are like that. So he should enjoy it, and just I'm sure he's a hard worker, and he'll come back even stronger next year.
It is interesting because actually talking about your first few years, it's very similar, isn't it? Because his rise, and now he's just had his debut for the Netherlands just recently. It's very similar, that rise, isn't it? Not those couple of years.
Yeah, and again, that's first of all good scouting. I can say they scouted me well as well, Tony Coden. I don't know if he's been involved in this one. I don't think so, but you know what? It's also like you gotta have a succession plan. You gotta plan ahead. at Sunderland, you're looking for that next goalkeeper. You're not looking for that you don't have to pay 50 million for because you can't, or that 50 million goalkeeper is not going to come to Sunderland. So you know what, that it's been a incredibly smart decision. And yeah, as I said, it's similar. To me, a little bit of probably not a lot of Sunderland fans knew who he was, but then he's come in, solid performances. Just been a great addition, and that's how you earn the respect. That's also how I earned my respect back there. Nobody knew who I was, and this, leading into the story that Peter Rees said, yeah, 3 or 4 games, and if I hadn't performed, I would be out. It's the same here, and that's credit to him that he has come in. He's got a foothold in there, and just put on good performances. So it's always good in hindsight to say, oh yeah, that was an easy choice to sign him. But as you said, yeah, I'm sure there were some doubts, but yeah, the scouting, you got to give them some credit.
Yeah. Just very, very last one on Sunderland, because obviously we're thinking ahead now, and you were, of course, involved in those 2 seasons where we finished 7th, and then it kind of fizzled out a little bit. What do you think Sunderland can do to try and make this sustainable and not a flash in the pan, and really concrete Sunderland into that, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, top half of the Premier League?
I think it's key that you have consistency. So you want to, not change too much in the squad. Yes, there'll be natural changes. People run out of contract. There might be players that haven't quite performed. But you got to realize the grass is not always green on the other side. So you have something in place there that works, and then it's just about fine adjusting. Looking at those small improvements. Not looking too far ahead or getting ahead of yourself. It's going to be equally as hard and with bigger expectations next year. So, I'm sure they'll do the groundwork here in the off season, identify some players in certain positions, and then they'll be ready to go come August. I think it starts August. Yeah. So yeah, no, I think it seems like they've got some smart people. The ownership. A good manager that. So and that's the key. Ultimately, yes, players, but you got to have you got to have everything aligned. And there are a lot of clubs you see they're not aligned, and you have, and that's why it's sort of up and down every season, because it's everything gels one year, but the next year everything falls apart. I don't see that happening with Sunderland. Will they finish 7th again? Hopefully. Yeah, no, it's going to be more difficult. Like with European football, it's going to be more difficult. So hopefully, fingers crossed. I hope so.
Yes, it's same position as last summer. If someone offered that right now, I think we'll snap your hand off. But
sure.
But moving on, just to finish up, because it is a World Cup summer as well, and we are talking in the days following the incident involving Christian Eriksen, and everyone is, of course, relieved that he's expected to be out of hospital very soon, or if not out of hospital, I suppose, when this is released. But just in general, we said at the beginning, you are covering it, Thomas, and I imagine you're really looking forward to this World Cup.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the football. I don't know if I'm probably like a lot of other people. I'm over FIFA and everything they've done around it. But yeah, I can't wait for it to start. I think let the football do the talking, not the politics. And there's so many storylines. The big teams, obviously England. Be excitement there. They should be going deep into the tournament, and down here in Australia, there's obviously some excitement. From a personal level, I'm deeply disappointed that Denmark didn't make it. We fumbled it, historically fumbled our qualification. So that is going to be a bit of a downer. But yeah, no, it's going to be the biggest show on earth. Again, as soon as we kick off, yes, I can't wait for it, and I'll be covering it on Australian TV, some podcasts, some radio stuff. So yeah, let's get it on.
Let's get the first game kicked off. Is there any tips? Any dark horses?
You know what? It's going to be the usual. You look at France, Spain, England. I'm very interested to see how Argentina comes back. How an older Messi fits in. How do Brazil under Ancelotti do? Can Portugal with Ronaldo? On paper they look really, really strong. And then I'm sure there's going to be, and then the home countries. I've got my doubts about the US, Mexico, and Canada, but it's always great for the tournament if one of them really has a good run, like we saw in South Korea when they did well. And, so I think with the really small countries, the Cape Verde and, a few of the others, that's going to be interesting to see if that sort of extension to 48 teams, is it just money grab or is there actually enough quality to actually make it competitive? So that'll be interesting as well to follow. There's dark horses. Norway. We've just made in Denmark. We just made a vote, an unofficial vote, who to support for the World Cup, and most Danes want to support Norway. So that's obviously. That's how it goes. We have Sweden are probably our biggest rival, so that's natural that we didn't choose them. So I'm sure Haaland, Odegaard, they've got a good side. Strand Larsen, so that'll be interesting to follow to see if they can, emulate the Danish sides as well. That's done well in the past.
It'd be interesting to see. And from a Sunderland perspective, we just want to wrap Granit Xhaka up in cotton wool and not let anyone touch him for the whole World Cup. But that's a brilliant place to end on, Thomas. And I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. And, just to reinstate that you are still, of course, a legend in Sunderland. We'd still chant your name every single season. And hopefully in December, if you do come back,
yes,
it'd be absolutely fantastic to see you.
Let's aim for that.
Brilliant. Good stuff. Thanks again, Thomas. Really appreciate it. And enjoy your summer. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Look, we'll have loads on what's happening at Sunderland on the Roker Report website. And, of course, our daily episodes on How We're the Podcast. But from us, it's bye for now.
You can't reason with the sun. Trust us, we've tried. This summer, it's time to put that angry ball of fire on mute. Columbia's Omni-Shade technology is engineered to protect you from the sun's harsh rays that can burn and damage your skin. The sun is relentless, but so is our gear. Level up your summer at Columbia.com to spend more time outside and less time slathering on aloe lotion. You're welcome. Columbia, engineered for whatever.
When the going gets tough, get after it with NOS Energy. Keep your foot flat to the floor and never let off. Thunder from top gear to no fear. Never back down, never slow down. Your body is machine with 800 horses coursing through its veins. So go hard, go fast. Go on, grab a can of NOS Energy and get after it.